By the fifth night of the black glass blizzard, Cold Spur Ranch had vanished. Wind crossed Red Flint Basin above 45 miles an hour. The cold stood at 42 below. Snow erased the line between ground and sky. Along the north wall, the roof above the heat bay tore loose. Snow smothered the one bed still burning. Johanna Vervoort tied the guide rope around her waist and gave the other end to Alden Rook. If it failed, the calving room lost its heat. Inside, Bram counted rope signals at the north door. Orrin Price, who had laughed at every rag she tied, guarded the stalls. Ephraim held a snow-choked vent. 2 newborn calves lay under a dead woman's red blanket. Johanna had reached Cold Spur with her boy and half a biscuit hidden in his coat, asking for milk and 3 days. How had a homeless widow turned a rancher's waste into the last heat between his herd and the deadliest winter the range had seen? Late on the 24th of November in 1886, Johanna Vervoort reached Cold Spur Ranch with one hand on her son's shoulder and the other closed around a broken garden thermometer. They had walked the last 4 miles beside a stalled freight wagon. The teamster would not carry passengers over ground that might swallow a wheel, and Johanna would not beg him twice. She kept Bram on the sheltered side of the road, out of the wind, and she watched the snow the way another woman might watch a stranger's hands. The ranch showed itself first as smoke, then as a barn too large for the country around it. It had been built to be seen. A man with money had raised it. A man without money now owned it. 2 hands were carrying something small and stiff out of the barn. Johanna knew the shape before she was close enough to name it. A calf, dead, its legs already set. They laid it against the fence with the others and did not speak. Near the house, a man knelt over a second calf beside the open kitchen door, rubbing its ribs with a grain sack. Steam lifted off the animal's wet coat and off the manure pile behind the barn, and Johanna's eyes went to the second steam before the first. She stood there a moment, reading it. The wind came out of the northwest. Frost had crept along the heads of the barn nails, and the pile of muck behind the building breathed like a live thing into the cold. Bram pressed against her coat. He was 8. He had eaten half a biscuit that morning and folded the rest into his sleeve, the way he folded away everything he was afraid to lose. "Do the hands sleep in the barn?" he asked. He did not ask because he was curious. He asked because a boy sent to work off a debt slept where the animals slept, and he wanted to know it before it happened to him. Johanna heard the whole of it under the small words. She did not answer. The man at the door looked up. His name was Alden Rook, and he had the still face of someone who had run out of luck slowly enough to get used to it. He took in the handcart, the woman, the boy, the coat cut for a larger person. "There's no work here for winter," he said. "I can't feed the hands I have." "I did not come for wages," Johanna said. She looked at the calf under his hands, then at the row of them stacked cold against the fence. "You are throwing away the only fuel on this place big enough to heat that barn." Alden's hands went still on the grain sack. Behind him, in the doorway, 2 tin cups sat on the shelf by the stove. Only one had been used. He brought them inside because the boy's lips had gone the color of skimmed milk, and a man could argue with a woman in the cold as well as in the warm. Johanna set her cart handle down, but did not sit. Bram sat where he was told and kept his sleeve close to his body. "Say it plain," Alden said. He kept rubbing the calf. The animal had begun to lift its head. "You have calving cows and no heat and no wood to make heat," Johanna said. "I can build you heat out of what you shovel outside. Not from wood, from the pile." Manure. Manure, wet straw, horse litter, brush, packed and fed with air, it works itself hot. Hot enough to warm a wall. I grew up doing it for early lettuce outside Ghent. My husband did it for 20 years after. Your husband. Peter. He is dead. She said it the way a person reads a fence line, marking it and moving on. Alden did not push. He had a fence line of his own. How fast? He said. 3 days to show you warmth you can measure. I will not promise the whole barn. No one can heat a barn that size with a pile. I promise a difference in the north stalls where your calves are freezing. And you want? A place out of the wind for my boy, milk for him, and what bread you can spare. No wages until the heat is real. If it is not real in 3 days, we walk on, and you have lost nothing but the muck you were already carrying out. It was a fair trade, said between two people who each expected to be cheated. Alden looked at Bram, at the sleeve held tight to the small ribs. The milk comes first, he said. Your claims can wait until morning. He poured milk into the second tin cup, the one that had gone unused, and set it in front of the boy. Bram looked at it a long moment, as though it might be taken back before he drank. Alden gave her a week, not 3 days, because he knew cattle heat, and knew it rose and fell and was not honest inside 72 hours. Then he said the thing that sealed it. I'll not call it charity, he said, if you'll not call my cattle foolish. They are not foolish, Johanna said. They are cold. That is a different thing, and it can be fixed. The next cow was due inside 4 days. Outside, the wind changed its note against the eaves, and neither of them named it aloud. She began the following morning before the men had finished their coffee. Johanna went at the pile behind the barn with a fork and sorted it by hand, the way another woman sorts wash. Frozen clods she threw aside. Fresh horse litter she kept. She wanted the wet and the dry both, and she wanted them layered, not mixed, and she made Bram count every fork load onto the sledge, so that later she could say what she had used and be believed. Inside, against 40 feet of the north wall, she built the wall of muck. Fresh litter, then cattle manure, then torn straw and spoiled hay, then a scattering of chopped willow. Nearly 6 feet wide, 4 feet high. She packed each layer down with her boots because she was afraid of the 4 days closing on her, and fear made her pack it harder than her father ever had. Orrin Price watched from the aisle with a pitchfork he would not lift. He was the senior hand, and he had lived through winters by trusting nothing new. A wall built out of what sensible men shovel outside, Orrin said, Mrs. Vervoort's dung palace. Sensible men are burying calves this week, Johanna said. She did not look up. Ephraim Solo, the younger one, said nothing, but he stayed near, watching where her hands went. Bram called the count. 40. 41. He wrote each number on a slate with a nub of chalk, and when Alden passed through the barn, he saw the boy working the slate and slowed, and looked, and went on without a word. On the second day, the center of the wall began to steam. Johanna slid Peter's thermometer into the core, holding it the way he had taught her, and did not trust it until she had first laid her bare palm against the boards behind the pile. The wood was warm. The needle climbed past 120 degrees. Alden came and put his own hand flat on the timber and left it there. That's heat, he said, quiet, as if the word might spook the thing. That's heat, Johanna agreed. Then she frowned. Along the lower edge of the wall, where she had packed it hardest, beads of water had gathered on the timber, and they were not warm. They were cold, and they were sitting on the wood, and the wood does not like to sit wet in a country that goes to 20 below. She said nothing to Alden. She marked it on the slate herself, in her own poor letters, before she went to sleep that night. Wet on the boards, low end. Dr. Hollis Fenner reached Cold Spur on the third day, sent for after the second calf died. He was the territorial veterinarian, an old army remount man, and he did not laugh at the wall. He walked its length with his hands behind his back and his nose working, and what he found was worse than what Johanna had marked. "You've got ammonia off this in the calf stalls," Fenner said. "You've got standing damp on the timber and no way for the air to leave. Heat means nothing if the animals have to breathe the pile to get it." He turned to Alden. "Move your stock out of these stalls before you warm them into pneumonia." Johanna did not defend the wall. She took the fork and cut the pile open along its middle, and the core came apart sour and black and waterlogged, choked of air, and the smell that came off it was the smell Fenner had named. "I packed it too tight," she said, "and I used cattle muck too wet and too much of it. It cannot breathe. I built it like a garden bed, and a garden bed is small. This is not small." She did not say it had been hurried. She did not say she had been afraid of the 4 days. Excuses were another kind of debt, and she had left a house full of debts behind her. Alden looked at the ruined wall a long moment. Orrin in the aisle had the grace not to speak. "Tell me what the mistake cost," Alden said. 2 days. "Then we've lost 2 days. He took up a fork. "Where do you want it torn down?" He did not send her off. He tore the wall down beside her, the two of them and Ephraim, while Fenner watched and made his notes. Bram stood back against the stall boards, waiting to be told to pack the cart, because in the house he had come from a wall that failed meant a family put out of doors. Alden saw the boy's face. He knew what a boy looked like when he was waiting to be put out. "Bring me the slate," Alden said. "We start a book. Every load out, every load in. We'll not guess at this twice." Bram brought the slate. Outside, in the next stall down, a cow shifted her weight and lowed low in her chest, and Johanna turned her head because she knew that sound. The 4 days were up. The cow was starting. The calf came that night in a cold stall, with no wall to warm it and no bay yet built, and it came because cows do not read a man's schedule. Alden did the calving. He had done 100, and he did this one with his sleeves back and his voice low, reading the cow before he touched her, and Johanna saw at once that whatever she knew about heat, she did not know this, and he did. He was the better cattleman on the place, and would stay so. She fetched and dried and kept the straw clear, and did not reach past what she understood. The calf slid out wet and stunned into the cold, and the cold took at it the moment it left the cow. Alden cleared its mouth. Johanna went at its wet coat with clean sacking, hard, the way she would have gone at a chilled child, and it was not enough because the stall was a box of freezing air, and the calf was losing heat faster than 2 pairs of hands could put it back. Alden stood, went to the shut cupboard at the end of the barn, the one nobody opened, and came back with a blanket of red wool. He did not explain it. He laid it over the calf and tucked it under, and only Johanna saw that his hands were not quite steady when he did. The blanket had been Miriam's. His wife had kept it for calves that could not stand, and it had lain folded in that cupboard for 2 years, and he had not touched it in all that time. He said none of this. He set it on the calf and stepped back and let Johanna do the rubbing through the wool. Bram held the lantern. He held it without being told, and he held it steady. And once he leaned in and touched the calf's ear where it lay flat, and Johanna watched her son forget for a moment to be afraid. The calf found its legs a little before dawn and went at the cow and nursed. Alden let out a breath. "Your wall didn't save that one," he said. It was not a taunt. It was a man keeping the account honest. "No," Johanna said. "Warm sacking and your 2 hands and colostrum in it before daylight saved that one. The wall is for the 14 coming after, when there are not enough hands to do this every time." The red blanket lay over the sleeping calf, dark with damp, and neither of them moved it. They started the reel system on the 5th day, and this time Johanna did not hurry. She would not build one pile again. One pile settled, lost heat, and could not be renewed without robbing the calves of warmth in the middle of the job. So she built two bays, side by side, along the outside of the north wall, each 24 feet long, 6 feet wide, 5 feet deep at the center. Between the muck and the timber, she laid a course of dry stone and packed clay, dragged from the collapsed smokehouse, so that the wet mass never touched the wall. Under each bay she ran a gravel drain sloped to a catch pit outside, so seepage left instead of pooling, and through the mass she stood bundles of finger-thick willow, upright, every 6 feet, so the pile could breathe from the bottom. If it cannot breathe, it turns sour, she told Ephraim. You watched it turn sour. We give it air or we do it all again. She stopped using a recipe. She used her feet and her nose. 2 forkfuls of horse litter, one of damp manure, one of straw, and old hay, a scatter of willow. She made Oren stand on a finished section. If your heel sinks and water rises, it's too wet. She made Alden stand on the next. If it doesn't give under you, it can't breathe. Alden crouched and drew in the dirt with a stick while she worked. He drew a passage into the barn that would let cattle come and go without opening the great north doors to the wind. He set the calving room in the northwest corner against the warmed stone 22 feet by 30, low partitions of plank lined with straw and clay. When she looked over his shoulder, he did not cover the drawing. He turned it so she could see it whole. Her heat and his cattle way had become one plan in the dirt, and neither of them remarked on it. The first bay heated fast and well. Then, on the 9th day, its temperature began to fall, and when they opened the top, they found the upright willow chimneys crushed flat under the settling weight. It packs itself shut, Johanna said, the way the first wall did. Slower, but the same. They wove open baskets of willow around each chimney so the pile could not close them. Bram recorded the day the baskets went in and the day the heat came back in his book in 2 neat columns. The rebuilt bay held above 130 degrees for 2 weeks running. They had enough fresh material to fill only 1 bay. The second stood open and empty, waiting for muck they did not yet have, and every cold morning Johanna looked at the empty bay and did the sum of days in her head. Warren Dace rode in on the 12th day from Broad Banner, 4 times the ground Alden held, and the freight road to Buffalo in his pocket. He had tried to buy Cold Spur's shorthorn bulls and its spring water after Miriam died. He had not stopped wanting them. He came for a breeding payment he knew Alden could not make, and he found the barn steaming and a woman in a man's coat directing 2 hired men. Rook's finally hired someone who knows what his ranch is worth, Dace said. She's piling it against the wall. She has a week, Alden said. You have none. Fenner arrived again while Dace was still in the yard, and the vet did not spare the work to spare feelings. He pulled a willow chimney half out to see whether it reached the bottom. He tested the drain slope with a bucket of water. He put a dozen hard questions to Johanna, one after another, and every one of them was fair. What keeps the wet mass off your timber? Stone and clay, a hand's breadth of dead air besides. Where do the gases go? Up the chimneys and out under the eave, away from the calves. What happens when snow seals your vents? Johanna paused. She had not thought it through to the end. Then someone clears them, she said. By hand. Every hour if the storm is bad. Fenner grunted. You'll want a boy who can be trusted to watch a strip of wool and tell you the truth of it. He looked at Bram. Record the core, the room, and the yard. 3 readings, 3 times a day. Every birth, every cough, every wet bed, 21 days. I'll not certify a thing I can't read. I don't believe this will save your calves, Fenner said to Alden. Johanna answered before Alden could. You should not, she said. Not until it does. That night, Alden gave Bram the 3 readings to keep as his own work, and he told him why. A wrong number does nothing, Alden said. A number we pretend not to see can kill a calf. So you write the true one, even when it's bad. Especially when it's bad. Bram wrote the true ones. Late, he fell asleep, sitting against the stall boards with the book open in his lap. When the boy was asleep, Alden went up to the loft and brought down a small trundle bed, unfinished, the kind a man plans for a child who is coming. It had waited in the loft 2 years for a child who never did. He planed the rough edge smooth in the lamplight and said nothing about it. Johanna sewed no cover. She cut one from Peter's old garden canvas and laid it over the little mattress. And the 2 dead were in the room, and no one spoke their names. The next morning, frost was standing white on the nails inside the partition, and the warmed room had begun to sweat. The first real cold came on the 18th day and fell to 18 below by the small hours. They stood the test through the night, all of them, and read it out at dawn. The fermentation core, 143 degrees. The calving room, 7 above 0. The main aisle, 2 below. The open yard, 18 below. No draft reached the calves. The wool strip hung slack and steady over the pens all night. That was the good half. The bad half. The water coupling on the trough line had frozen solid, and one of the bedded platforms was dry on top and wet underneath, seepage having crept in from the stall next door because Johanna had raised the platform only 2 inches, and 2 inches was not enough. She found it herself, her hand under the straw, dry on the surface and wet below. She did not wait to be caught. I miss the floor, she said. The platform's too low, and the coupling wants a steeper fall so it drains itself when the trough's shut. Both mine. Alden did not scold her. He had watched a proud woman lay her own mistake on the table before anyone asked, and that told him more than any night of good numbers. You promised to heat it, he said. You never promised to guess right the first time. They raised the platforms 8 inches and cut a groove to lead the seepage away. Alden pulled the frozen coupling and set the line at a continuous steep fall so no water could stand in it to freeze. Fenner, reading the night's figures, gave them a short nod and no more. One good night proves one thing, Fenner said, that you've found the next weakness. There's always a next one. At supper, Bram ate everything in his bowl and reached for more, and did not fold anything into his sleeve. But the old half-biscuit still lay hard under his mattress, kept against a day he could not yet believe would not come. 2 mornings later, Johanna found it there, gray and stone hard. She said nothing. She carried it out and threw it to the chickens, and came back in and poured coffee into the second tin cup without being asked, and Alden watched her do it and set his jaw against whatever moved in him and drank from the first. 3 weeks of Bram's book told the story better than any man's word. Repeatable heat, a dry room, no coughing in the calving stalls. Fenner read the columns twice and gave his cautious approval, which from him was a landslide of praise. Then Warren Dace came back, and this time he came to cut them off. My wagons won't cross your spur road this winter, Dace told Alden, unless you sign over the watering strip on the south line. It was the shortest road to Buffalo, and with it closed no wood, no grain, no help would reach Cold Spur until the thaw. Dace looked at the steaming bays and shook his head like a man watching money burned. You're risking blooded cattle on garden heat, he said. Johanna set down her fork. Have you ever built a hotbed, Mr. Dace? I raise cattle, not lettuce. Today, she said, you're raising neither. He left without an answer, which for Warren Dace was the same as being answered. That night, Alden spread out the hay tally and the wood tally and did the sum with Johanna at the table, Bram's book open between them. How long if the cattle eat full? Alden asked. 31 days. And if the road stays shut past that? Johanna looked at the two thin columns. Then we prepare for 40, she said. And we fill the second bay now, while we still can, so we've heat in reserve when the first one dies down. He added a line to the book beneath his own name and hers. He wrote the boy's name there, too, so that the ledger showed 3 hands keeping Cold Spur, and he turned it so Bram could see it before the boys slept. For a day and a night the sky was wrong. Then a warm wind came down out of the southwest, sudden and soft, and the top of the old snow began to melt. Orrin welcomed it with both arms open. Chinook, Orrin said. That'll ease us. Johanna went out into the yard and watched the meltwater run down under the crust of old snow, dark and silent. And she watched it, and did not warm to it at all. If it freezes before the ground opens, she said, the cattle will be standing on a lid. The warm wind blew until sunset. Then it stopped all at once, the way a door closes. By morning the basin had gone black with ice from ridge to ridge, and the grass beneath it was sealed away, and Johanna Vervoort stood at the north window with Peter's thermometer in her hand and looked at the horizon losing its depth, and knew that everything they had built was about to be asked whether it was enough. The chamber's water climbed only to a finger's width below the red line now, and it climbed slower each night. Luz drew for households first and asked no payment. The rest she held. When Jory Mellon came down the path leading a string of thirsty cattle and offered double for a full trough, she gave him water for his breeding stock and his saddle horses, and not 1 bucket for the rest of the herd. You'd let good cattle die for a line drawn in chalk, Jory said. I'd let the chamber live, Luz said. Dead cattle sell for hides. A dead chamber sells for nothing and takes the basin with it. Jory drove his herd on toward the county water at a loss he would remember, and he cursed her the length of the path, and she let him. Hester watched him go and turned to a clean column in the ledger and wrote what the herd water would have brought and what the breeding water had brought instead, so the cost of the choice would stand in ink beside the choice. You're the least popular water in 3 counties, Hester said. I know it. You could plant the low bench now. You've earned the seed. You could take the mining contract Harrow turned down for you. You could buy a proper pump on credit against next year's water. Luz shook her head at every one of them. Every new promise drinks before the bucket reaches the surface, she said. Instead of spreading out, she went down. She strengthened. She recut the armored channel a hand deeper along the bedrock, mortared the collar's weakest joint, moved the clean barrels to higher ground, and coiled fresh rope at the shaft head where a person could reach it in the dark. Abel's shallow well had begun to give mud before it gave water. Luz heard it from Nalda, who heard it from Abel's wife, that Abel pumped it dry every morning now and waited for it to seep back brown, and that the corn on Cottonwood Flat, the expanded acres he had been so proud of, had begun to curl from the outside rows in. Abel came down twice more in the dark for household water, and twice more Luz gave it, and once, from the rim in daylight, she saw him pacing the length of her armored bypass, stepping it off boot to boot, counting something to himself. He did not know she watched. He measured her hard water road, the way a man measures a thing he means to argue with, or a thing he has begun to believe. Nalda took to organizing the households now, a time for each family to come and draw, a jar apiece, so there was no crowding at the collar and no waste. She kept her own small ledger in a hand that grew surer each week. When Hester had to freight a load to the stage road, Nalda kept the counts and kept them right. A rider came through the basin near the 90th dry day with news off the rim. A cloudburst had stood over the cinder-back country for the better part of an hour, he said, and the high draws were running, and the color of the runoff was the color of stripped ground. Harrow rode down that same afternoon. He did not dismount. "It's coming off the high country whether it rains on us or not," he told Luz. "Could be tonight. Could be 3 days. When it comes down these washes, it'll come as a wall, and it'll come before you feel a drop here. Get your tools up. Get anything you love off the wash floor." Luz cleared the bypass mouth of the brush that had blown into it. She lowered a hand axe and a coil of rope on separate lines and lashed them where a person standing in the channel could reach them. Hester sealed the hatch, weighted it, and carried the clean barrels to the high bench above the flood line. Silas, when the word reached him, went out and reinforced the turn of his ditch with sacks of gravel and abandoned any pretense he was not helping. Abel did the opposite. Abel took the news of coming water and cut a straight trench, deep and clean, from the upper edge of Cottonwood Flat down to the main wash, so the flood, when it came, would run off his good soil fast and leave his corn standing. It was the same instinct that made his furrows run straight downhill. Move the water, move it fast, move it by the shortest road. Luz walked up to the flat when she saw what he was digging. "That trench points at your own lower field," she said. "And your barn, and the well. You're not sending the water away, you're aiming it." Abel leaned on his shovel. He did not look at her, which she had come to know was not contempt, but the nearest thing he had to shame. "Water has to go somewhere," he said. "Shortest road's the fastest empty." "The shortest road for hard water is the deepest cut it can make," Luz said. "You'll have a canyon where you've got a trench. You send yours around the long way and lose half your ground to a stone ditch that grows nothing." He drove the shovel in. "I'll not run my whole farm the way a girl runs a rock pile." Luz did not say it again. Her father's saying stood between them unspoken. A hidden mistake still belongs to the builder. And she left him to his straight, clean, fatal trench and went back down to the wash. The first gust came off the north with the smell of rain in it, rain that was falling somewhere she could not see. Above Empty Cup, the sky was going the color of an old bruise, but not a drop had fallen. Then, in the dry bed at her feet, small pebbles began to move. They rolled and ticked and gathered, pushed by nothing she could see, and she knew that meant the water was already coming underground through the gravel ahead of the wall, the way her father had said it would, the first of the two waters announcing the second. "Up," Luz called to Hester. "Up on the bench. Now." The brown line came around the bend low and almost gentle, no higher than a boot. Then the ground behind it caught up, and the low line stood up into a moving wall of water the color of the hills, carrying brush and a fence rail and the bloated shape of something that had drowned upstream, and it came down the wash with a sound like a train and a smell like turned earth. It hit the first spreader. The low, angled ribs of brush and stone caught the front of it, dragged at it, spread it wide and thin across the shallow approach. And for one moment the whole flood staggered and lost its edge. Then it filled the spreader and came on. But it came on slower and lower and broken. The second spreader took the broken water and bent under it. Luz saw the stone shudder, saw one rib begin to go, and then the armored channel took the main weight of the flood, and the second spreader held what was left. The hard water found its road. It roared down the bedrock spine on bare stone, fast and ugly, and going exactly where she had built it to go, around the collar, past the barrels, away. She had almost let herself believe it would hold clean when the mesquite came down the wash. A whole tree, roots and all, torn out of some bank upstream, turning slow in the current. It struck the mouth of the bypass sideways and wedged, and behind it, in a breath, a mat of brush began to pack, and the flood that had been finding its road began instead to pool and rise and lean toward the collar. "It'll top the channel," Luz shouted over the water. "It'll come at the shaft." She took the rope off the shaft head, tied it around her waist with a knot her father had drilled into her hands, and looped the standing end twice around the collar's heaviest stone. Then she went down onto the wet ledge above the bypass with the hand axe, to cut the brush mat loose before the wedged mesquite turned the whole flood onto everything she had built. "Luz," Hester was at the collar, both hands on the rope. "Hold what I give you," Luz said, and went down. She cut into the brush mat where it packed against the trunk. It came loose in wet slabs, and each slab that tore free let a gout of the pooled water find the channel again and run off harmless down the road she had made for it. She was winning it. 3 more cuts, and the mesquite would float clear. The trunk shifted. The freed water moved it before she felt it move, rolled it a quarter turn, and the root ball swung and struck the ledge under her feet and knocked her flat. And then the water that had been pooling came through all at once and took her off the stone and into the bypass channel with it. The rope went tight. It caught her hard under the ribs and swung her against the far bank, and the water climbed over her and tried to pull the knot her father had taught her and could not. At the collar, the heaviest stone began to drag toward the channel with her weight and the water's weight on the rope together. Hester had it and could not hold it and would not let go. Silas reached them then. He had come down the moment the rider passed his place, and he took the rope off the dragging stone and wrapped it once around his own body, and once around Morrow's saddle horn where the mare stood trembling at the head of the path, and he leaned back into it. Abel came behind him. Abel, who had left his straight trench to the flood and run for the wash, and set his hands on the rope behind Silas and his boots in the gravel and pulled. The 2 brothers and the mare and the widow drew Luz up out of the bypass, hand over hand, against the water's whole weight, and laid her on the wet stone of the bench, coughing brown water, alive. The second spreader failed while they knelt over her. It let go all at once and washed down the channel in pieces. It had done its work. It had held long enough. The mesquite, freed of Luz's weight, and the pooling water both, finally rolled clear of the bypass mouth and went on down the wash, and the flood found its road again and took it, roaring past the collar on the bare bedrock, around and away. The timber hatch stayed shut. The armored channel carried the killing water past the shaft in the dark. Up on Cottonwood Flat, Abel's straight trench filled and cut deeper, until it was not a trench, but a raw gully 10 feet wide, and it took the topsoil off the lower field in sheets, and drove a flood of mud into the shallow well, and filled it to the lip with ruin. By full dark, the flood had passed. The wash ran a shrinking brown thread where an hour before there had been a wall. No one yet knew whether the flood had reached the hidden chamber or fouled it, or whether the summer's whole labor lay poisoned under the closed hatch. At first light they read what the water had written. Hester would not let anyone open the hatch until she had walked the whole collar on her knees, feeling every joint. It had shifted less than the width of Harrow's smallest measuring mark. She opened it then, and Luz drew the first bucket, and it came up brown and cloudy. "No," Luz said, and poured it back down the shaft. "Not for drinking, not until it settles and runs clear, and I've watched it a day." The shaft itself stood plumb and whole. The chamber below had risen. She could hear the difference in the sounding lines fall, but the floodwater that reached it had come slowed and filtered through gravel, not straight off the top of the ground, and by the second day the draw ran clear again and settled sweet. Then they walked the basin, Luce and Hester and Harrow, and later Nalda with her paper and pencil, and they measured what the night had done. Cottonwood Flat had lost its topsoil in long tongues where the water had run, 4 and 5 inches of good dark loam gone down the wash to somewhere it would never be soil again. Abel's straight trench had become a gully a man could stand in. The shallow well was full to the brim with mud. The expanded corn lay flat, roots in the air. At Empty Cup, the sacrificial gravel trap Luce had dug above the collar held nearly a foot of stone and debris the flood had dropped when the spreaders slowed it. Inside her small planting pockets, where the tepary beans still stood, lay a thin, fresh skin of fine silt the gentle water had laid down, new soil, given, not taken. The chamber stood higher than it had all summer. One spreader was gone, one barrel was staved in, the collar had not moved. Harrow ran his line along the collar and along the gully both, and wrote the 2 numbers in his book, and looked at them a while. "No one's going to argue these," he said. "Nature already has." Jory Mellon came down that morning to see the creek that had eaten his mockery all summer. He stood at the trap full of caught gravel, and the collar standing plumb, and the little pockets gaining soil, and he took his hat off, not to Luce, but to the work. "She never tried to hold the whole flood," Jory said, to no one, to everyone. "She gave the hard water a road and broke the rest on those low ribs. That's the whole of it." He turned the hat in his hands. "I called it a grave with banks. I was looking at the banks." Nalda wrote each measurement down in her sure new hand. Then she said the thing that was truest of all of them. Water can fail a household once. A household should not let it fail twice. Abel came last. He came down the path near noon with mud dried to his knees and a shovel over his shoulder, and he stood at the foot of the collar where his squared stone still lay untouched in the gravel where he had left it in the dark weeks before. He looked at the trap full of debris, and the road of bare stone the flood had run down and gone, and the shaft standing whole. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say the trench had been a fool's work, though it had cost him his lower field and his well and half his corn, and everyone standing there knew it. He looked at the armored channel a long moment. Then he asked the only question he had come to ask. "Where do you send the hard water?" Luce did not answer with victory. She did not answer with words at all at first. She walked to the exposed bedrock spine where the channel ran and put her hand flat on the stone, and Abel came and stood beside her and looked where she looked. Then she went to the survey shed and brought out her father's stone hammer, the narrow one wrapped in oiled cloth, and she put it in Abel's hands. "You send it down bare rock," she said, "where it can't cut, and you slow the gentle water before it so the ground can drink. You don't stop water. You tell it where to go." Abel closed his hand around the hammer's worn handle. It had been Tomas's, and before that it had likely been the Sonoran's, and now it was in the hand of the man who had given Tomas's daughter a dry creek and kept the well. He carried the first stone up from the wash himself. They rebuilt through the back of the summer, the 4 of them, and then the whole basin. Abel carried stone and learned, at 42, from a girl of 16, how a stone was set. Silas carried 2, and when he lifted a flat slab to the new spreader, he asked which way it went. "Which face turns uphill?" Silas said. "The one that doesn't invite the water underneath," Luz said, and showed him with her hands, and he turned the stone and set it, and it held. Nalda's 2 sons cleared the debris trap. Jory Mellon hauled down a wagon of fence timber for a new hatch cover and would not take pay for it. Harrow marked the red line fresh on the staff gauge and taught Abel to read it, and Abel read it and understood at last what the line meant and why the girl had turned wagons away all summer to keep the water above it. Next season, Abel said, once, not looking up from the stone he was setting, I won't cut another straight trench down that field. It was the nearest thing to an apology he ever spoke, and it was about the next season's work, not the last season's wrong, and it was enough. Ansel Pike came down on the 14th of September with his ledger. He had heard the basin talk, and he had come to see the books himself before he took a mare and a dead man's tools off a live girl on the 15th. Hester laid the ledger open on the barrel head. Every bucket, every sail, every jar of household water given free through the drought, the whole column of it, dated and totaled. Near $9 of water that could have cleared the debt twice over, handed away instead to families whose wells had failed. Ansel read it down to the bottom. He was quiet a while. You could have paid me in July, he said. If you'd sold what you gave away, you'd have paid me in July and had money left. She'd have had money, Hester said, and the basin would have had corpses. Luz counted out $31.20 in water receipts and paid the $18.45, and Ansel wrote it settled. Then he drew his pencil through the interest and drew it through the collateral clause that had put Morrow and the tools at risk, and he closed the book. The tools stay yours, he said. A person who gives away water in a drought will pay a debt in a flood. I should have known it in June. Abel came to Luz at the end of that week and offered, without being asked, permanent wagon access across Cottonwood Flat and the restoring of her share in the old family road. She took that. She had asked for it once at a pine table and been refused, and now it was given, and she took it. He offered the cabin deed, too. The cabin where her mother had lived and her father had died, that Abel had taken in the sale. Luz looked at it a long time. Then she signed it over to Hester, because Hester had held the girls $3, and the girls' anger both, all summer, and asked for nothing. Some weeks later, Hester found the $3 silver folded into the pocket of Luz's notebook, the exact $3 she had laid on the pine table in the spring. No one had said a word. Abel had put them there. The basin made a cooperative of it before the autumn was out. Households first, breeding stock second, commercial sale last, and never below the red. Nalda kept the ledger when Hester was away and kept it right. Months on, a second-hand wind pump turned slow above the covered shaft, bought with honest earnings after the crisis, and not before, and it lifted the water Luz still measured every morning and rationed every day. The chamber did not water the whole basin. It never had, and it never would. It kept the households and a modest crop and a managed few animals, and it kept them because Luz never once asked it for more than the rock returned in the night. Luz Soria became, in time, the most solvent independent waterholder in the district, not because the water was endless, but because she had proven in front of a surveyor and a drought and a flood exactly how much it was, and had never sold a drop she could not replace. She bought the upland above the wash to protect the cracks that fed the chamber. She kept her father's tools. Empty Cup Wash had never grown richer than Cottonwood Flat. It never made a single drop of water. It only held what the rock offered, long enough for the living things around it to use, and it turned the hard water aside instead of trying to own it. The drought had proved that good soil and a full well could still die of thirst. The flood had proved that 4 inches of the best loam in the basin could go down a straight trench in a single night. Empty Cup endured for another reason. Every stone in it had been given a purpose and a place, and when the water finally came down off the high country to judge the summer's work, purpose held where pride had washed away. Pip, the yellow dog, slept with his back against the first course of Collarstone, the one Luz had rebuilt after the slump, in the cool the stone kept even at noon. Abel carried another flat stone up from the wash, and stood with it, and asked Luz where it belonged. She turned it once in her hands to put the true face against the weather, and set it in his. They had called it worthless because nothing ran across the top of it. It endured because a girl learned what moved beneath it, and because she never asked it to give everything it held.